Chapter 1. The Obsession Begins. The grand ballroom of the Laurentian Hotel buzzed with the hum of high society, the creme de la creme of the business world. Adrien Devereaux, a billionaire known for his sharp intellect and unrelenting ambition, stood near the bar observing the crowd with his usual indifference. He had attended countless galas, yet none of them held his interest. Until tonight. Across the room, Cale Laurent commanded attention without even trying. With his tailored suit, sharp features, and an air of confidence that matched Adrien's own, Cale was unlike anyone Adrien had encountered. A successful alpha in his own right, Cale was the CEO of a rapidly growing tech company, and his wit and charisma had captivated many. But not Adrien, at least not until now. Adrien's gaze locked onto Cale, who was engaged in animated conversation with a group of executives. His laughter carried across the room, genuine and unrestrained. It sent an unfamiliar jolt through Adrien, one that unsettled him. For years, Adrien had believed himself immune to infatuation, his world too carefully constructed to allow for such distractions. But watching Cale, something within him shifted. Adrien's curiosity turned into fixation. He couldn't tear his eyes away, studying every movement, every expression. When Cale excused himself from the group and walked toward the balcony for a moment of solitude, Adrien seized the opportunity. Out on the balcony, the cool night air provided a stark contrast to the warmth inside. Cale leaned against the railing, gazing at the city skyline. Adrien approached, his presence commanding but not invasive. "Quite the view, isn't it?" Adrien said, his deep voice breaking the silence. Cale turned, his sharp blue eyes meeting Adrien's. For a moment, neither spoke. Then a small, amused smile tugged at Cale's lips. "It is, though I suspect the city isn't what you're interested in tonight." Adrien's lips twitched into a smile. "Observant, I'm Adrien Devereaux." "I know who you are," Cale replied, his tone cool but not unkind. "You're hard to miss." "And you must be Cale Laurent," Adrien said, extending a hand. "I've heard a lot about you." Cale shook his hand, his grip firm. "Likewise, though I doubt we run in the same circles." Adrien chuckled. "Perhaps not, but I'm a quick learner." The conversation was brief, but it was enough. Adrien could see it in Cale's eyes, confidence, strength, and a spark of curiosity that mirrored his own. But unlike others who sought Adrien's favor, Cale seemed immune to his usual charm. It intrigued him even more. As Cale returned inside, Adrien remained on the balcony, watching him disappear into the crowd. A plan was already forming in his mind. Cale was different, and Adrien wasn't one to let something, or someone, he wanted slip away. Tonight was only the beginning. Chapter 2. Orchestrated Encounters. Adrien Devereaux was a man who thrived on control. What he wanted, he got, and Cale Laurent was no exception. After their brief meeting at the gala, Adrien's obsession deepened. He had felt something rare that night, a spark he couldn't ignore. Cale wasn't just a challenge, he was a necessity. Adrien's first move was subtle. With his vast resources and influence, he delved into every detail of Cale's life. His business ventures, daily habits, social circles, nothing was off limits. Adrien discovered that Cale often visited a particular cafe near his company headquarters, a place where he could escape the pressures of the corporate world. It was there that Adrien decided their next encounter would take place. A week later, Cale sat at his usual spot in the cafe, a corner table by the window. He was immersed in his tablet, reviewing reports, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. He didn't notice Adrien until he heard a familiar voice. "Cale Laurent, as I live and breathe." Cale looked up, mildly startled, but quickly masking it. Adrien stood before him, impeccably dressed as always, his presence commanding the small cafe. "Adrien Devereaux," Cale replied, his tone polite but guarded. "This is a surprise." Adrien gestured toward the empty seat across from Cale. "May I?" Cale hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, what brings you here? Can't imagine this place is your usual scene." Adrien chuckled, a smooth practice sound. "Even I need a break from boardrooms and formal dinners. Besides, I hear they make an excellent Americano." Cale raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical but not entirely dismissive. Adrien ordered a coffee, his movements unhurried. He exuded confidence, but Cale could sense there was something more beneath the surface, something almost predatory. The conversation started light, touching on business trends and recent innovations in tech. Cale found himself grudgingly impressed by Adrien's knowledge. Despite his reservations, he couldn't deny the man's charisma. Adrian had a way of making people feel seen, as though they were the only person in the room. But Cale wasn't easily swayed. He kept the conversation professional, refusing to let Adrian gain the upper hand. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Adrian's interest in him went beyond casual curiosity. Over the next few weeks, Adrian's presence became a constant. He appeared at industry events, charity functions, and even more of Cale's favorite haunts. Each encounter seemed coincidental, but Cale couldn't ignore the pattern. Adrian was always there, always watching, always finding reasons to engage him in conversation. Cale's wariness grew, but so did his curiosity. Adrian was persistent, but not in a way that felt overtly threatening. He was charming, intelligent, and undeniably attractive, and yet there was something about him that put Cale on edge, a sense that Adrian's interest was too intense, too calculated. One evening, after another coincidental meeting at a networking event, Cale confronted Adrian. "You're everywhere lately," Cale said, his tone light but edged with suspicion. "Tell me, Adrian, is this all just a series of lucky accidents? Or are you trying to make an impression?" Adrian didn't miss a beat. He smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Would you believe me if I said both? I find you fascinating, Cale, and I don't believe in letting opportunities slip by." Cale crossed his arms, his posture defensive. "Opportunities? Is that what I am to you?" "Not at all," Adrian said smoothly, stepping closer. "You're much more than that. You're extraordinary, and I want to know more about you." Cale's eyes narrowed, but he didn't step back. "I don't trust people who push too hard, Adrian. And I don't trust myself to let go of something I want," Adrian countered, his voice low and deliberate. The tension between them crackled, but Cale turned away, breaking the moment. "You'll have to do better than charming words?" Adrian watched him walk away, a small smile on his lips. The chase was exhilarating, but it was only the beginning. Cale might not trust him now, but Adrian was patient. He always got what he wanted, and Cale would be no exception. Chapter 3. Pheromonal Influence. Adrien Devereaux was a man of many talents, and patience was one of them. While Cale Laurent's resistance intrigued him, it also fueled his obsession. Adrien had never encountered someone so determined to remain unattainable, but Adrien wasn't deterred. He thrived on challenges, and Cale was the ultimate prize. What Cale didn't know was that Adrien's interest had shifted into something far more calculated. Using his vast resources, Adrien commissioned his private research team to develop a plan. He had learned from their initial encounters that Cale, though sharp and confident, had one potential vulnerability. His alpha physiology was susceptible to prolonged exposure to another alpha's pheromones. It was rare, but it was enough for Adrien to exploit. A week later, Adrien invited Cale to a private business dinner under the pretense of discussing a potential partnership. Cale hesitated but eventually agreed, intrigued by the offer despite his lingering wariness. The dinner was held in Adrien's penthouse, an opulent space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The atmosphere was warm, the lighting soft, and the wine perfectly selected. Adrien was a gracious host, making Cale feel almost comfortable despite the underlying tension. As the evening progressed, Adrien made his move. He leaned in closer during their conversation, his voice low and soothing. The air seemed heavier, subtly laced with his alpha pheromones. Cale noticed the change, but couldn't pinpoint its source. His body responded before his mind could, a faint warmth spreading through him. "I have to admit, Cale," Adrien said, his eyes locked onto Cale's, "you're one of the most fascinating people I've ever met. It's rare to find someone who challenges me." Cale shifted in his seat, trying to ignore the strange pull he felt. "I'd say the feeling is mutual, but I still don't trust you." Adrien chuckled, the sound rich and deep. "Fair enough, trust takes time, but I'd like to think I've made some progress." Cale didn't reply immediately. His thoughts felt hazy, his usual sharpness dulled. The scent in the room was intoxicating, though he couldn't understand why. He glanced at Adrien, who looked relaxed and confident, as though he were completely unaware of the effect he was having. Over the next few days, Cale found himself thinking about Adrien more often. He felt restless, distracted, and strangely drawn to the man despite his reservations. Their encounters became more frequent, and each time Cale found it harder to resist Adrien's presence. Adrian, of course, was fully aware of the effect he was having. He ensured every meeting was carefully orchestrated, each interaction steeped in his pheromones. Kale's resistance was crumbling, and Adrian reveled in the control he was slowly gaining. But Kale wasn't completely unaware. He began noticing changes in himself. His body felt more sensitive, his emotions more volatile. He started questioning the growing pull he felt toward Adrian, wondering if it was natural or something more insidious. One evening, as they shared a drink in Adrian's study, Kale finally voiced his suspicion. "Adrian," he said, his tone firm despite the strange fog in his mind, "what exactly are you trying to do here?" Adrian raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "What do you mean? You've been everywhere lately, always just close enough to, I don't know. It feels like you're doing something to me." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, but his eyes glinting with a dangerous edge. "Kale, I think you're overthinking this. We've spent time together, yes, but that's because I enjoy your company. Is that so hard to believe?" Kale's jaw tightened. He wanted to push further, to demand answers, but his body betrayed him. The warmth in his chest grew stronger, his heart pounding in a way that made it hard to focus. Adrian leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "Kale, trust me, everything I've done has been for you, for us. You'll understand soon enough." Kale's head spun with conflicting emotions, suspicion, anger, and an inexplicable yearning. He couldn't see the full picture yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Adrian was playing a game, and Kale was dangerously close to losing. Chapter 4. The Transformation Begins. Kale Laurent prided himself on his sharp instincts, but lately those instincts felt dulled. His body, once strong and unshakable, seemed to betray him in ways he couldn't explain. He felt weaker, more susceptible to moods that weren't his own, and worst of all, he couldn't shake the growing need to be near Adrien Devereaux. He hated it. Kale had always been independent, a self-made alpha who thrived on control. But ever since Adrien entered his life, he felt that control slipping through his fingers. The subtle scent Adrien carried lingered in his mind long after their meetings, an intoxicating mix that left Kale restless at night. He didn't understand what was happening to him, but he knew Adrien had something to do with it. One morning, as Kale sat in his office trying to focus on work, his assistant entered with a package. "This just arrived for you, sir," she said, placing it on his desk. Kale opened the package to find a sleek black case. Inside was a small bottle of pills and a note. "For your recent fatigue, trust me, it'll help." "Adrien," Kale frowned. He hadn't mentioned his fatigue to anyone, let alone Adrien. How did he know? Suspicious but desperate, Kale debated whether to try them. The effects of his strange symptoms were beginning to impact his work, and he couldn't afford to appear weak. Against his better judgment, he decided to take one of the pills. The results were immediate. Kale felt a surge of energy and clarity that lasted the entire day. For the first time in weeks, he felt like himself again, or so he thought. He started taking the pills daily, noticing subtle changes in his body over time. His sharp alpha edge softened, replaced by a strange vulnerability he couldn't place. Inside, Kale became more sensitive to Adrien's presence. The man's scent, voice, and touch lingered longer in his mind. He found himself craving Adrien's company, though the thought infuriated him. He hated feeling dependent on anyone, especially someone like Adrien, whose intentions were far too opaque. One evening, Kale confronted Adrien during yet another orchestrated dinner. "What's in those pills you sent me?" Kale demanded, his tone sharp. Adrien looked up from his glass of wine, his expression calm. "They're supplements, Kale, designed to help with stress and fatigue." "Why? Do you feel unwell?" Kale's jaw tightened. "No, but I feel different, and I can't shake the feeling that you're behind it." Adrien's lips curled into a faint smile. "You give me too much credit, but if you're feeling better, isn't that what matters?" "That's not the point," Kale snapped. "You're hiding something, I know it." Adrien set his glass down and leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Kale, I'm not your enemy. Everything I've done has been for your benefit. You're exhausted, overworked, and vulnerable. I'm here to help, whether you trust me or not." Kale's anger faltered, replaced by a strange mix of confusion and longing. Adrien's words made sense, but they didn't feel right. Still, his body leaned toward Adrien, seeking something he couldn't name. As the weeks passed, the changes in Kale became undeniable. His once dominant alpha scent began to fade, replaced by a softer, sweeter aroma. His strength waned, replaced by a new sensitivity that left him confused and frustrated. He avoided Adrian, desperate to figure out what was happening, but the distance only made his cravings worse. Adrian, however, was patient. He knew the transformation was nearly complete, and he relished the thought of Kale finally understanding his place. Soon, Kale wouldn't just want Adrian. He would need him. One night, Kale's breaking point came. He stormed into Adrian's penthouse, his eyes blazing with fury. "What the hell have you done to me?" he demanded, slamming his hands on the table. Adrian stood, unbothered by Kale's rage. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean," Kale growled, his voice trembling. "My body, my instincts, they're not the same. I feel—" He cut himself off, refusing to say the word. Adrian's expression softened, his voice a low, soothing hum. "Kale, you're evolving. You're becoming something more. Something better." Kale staggered back, his breath hitching. You did this to me. You turned me into an omega," Adrian finished, stepping closer. "And now you'll finally understand how much we're meant to be together." Kale's world spun as Adrian's scent enveloped him, overwhelming his senses. He wanted to fight, to run, but his body betrayed him, leaning into Adrian's touch as if it was the only thing keeping him grounded. "Don't worry, Kale," Adrian whispered, his lips brushing against Kale's ear. "I'll take care of you now. You're mine." Kale's knees buckled, his will crumbling under the weight of Adrian's pheromones. He didn't know whether to fight or surrender, but one thing was clear. His life would never be the same. Chapter 5. The Revelation. Kale Laurence sat in the corner of his bedroom, his hands trembling as he clutched a medical report. The words blurred together, but one phrase stood out. Omega physiological markers confirmed. His worst fear had been realized. Adrian had done something to him. Something irreversible. His alpha strength, his independence, his very identity had been stripped away. Kale's body no longer felt like his own, and every time Adrian's scent lingered in his mind, he wanted to scream. Or worse, surrender. The pills, the constant encounters, the subtle but overwhelming influence of Adrian's pheromones. It all made sense now. Adrian had planned this. He had manipulated Kale into becoming something he could control. But why? Determined to confront him, Kale stormed into Adrian's penthouse that evening. The guards didn't even try to stop him. They knew better. Adrian was sitting by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, his expression calm as Kale barged in. "Kale," Adrian said, his voice smooth as ever. "What a pleasant surprise." "Cut the act, Adrian," Kale growled, throwing the medical report onto the coffee table. "You did this to me." Adrian set his glass down and leaned back in his chair, unfazed. "You're upset. I understand. But everything I've done was for your own good." "My good?" Kale snapped, his voice trembling with anger. "You stripped me of everything I am. You turned me into this." "You're still you, Kale," Adrian said, his tone calm but firm. "You're just better, stronger in a different way, more attuned to what you truly need." Kale's hands clenched into fists. "You had no right to make that decision for me. I'm not your experiment." Adrian stood, his presence towering but not threatening. "You're not an experiment. You're the person I care about more than anyone in this world. I couldn't stand by and watch you burn yourself out, fighting battles alone. You needed someone to take care of you, to protect you." Kale shook his head, his heart pounding. "You don't care about me. You care about control. You wanted to make me something you could keep under your thumb." Adrian stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I wanted to make you mine, and now you are." Kale's body betrayed him, as it always did around Adrian. The faint scent of the alpha was enough to make his knees weak, his resolve faltering. He hated the way his instincts screamed at him to submit, to lean into the comfort Adrian offered. "You think this is love?" Kale said, his voice barely audible. "You think I'll just accept this?" Adrian's gaze softened, a rare vulnerability flashing across his features. "I think you already have. You just don't want to admit it." Kale staggered back, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He hated Adrian for what he'd done, but he hated himself more for the part of him that wanted to believe Adrian's words. In the following days, Kale avoided Adrian, retreating into himself as he tried to come to terms with what had happened. But the changes in his body and mind were undeniable. His instincts, once purely alpha, now craved Adrian's presence. The loneliness he felt without him was unbearable. When Kale finally returned to Adrian's penthouse, it wasn't with anger but with resignation. "You win," Kale said, his voice hollow. "I can't fight this anymore." Adrian's expression was unreadable as he stepped closer. "This isn't about winning, Kale. It's about us." "Us," Kale said bitterly. "You took away my choices. How can there be Annis after that?" Adrian reached out, cupping Kale's face with surprising gentleness. "Because I love you, Kale, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it, if that's what it takes." Kale wanted to push him away, to yell and scream, but instead he found himself leaning into Adrian's touch. Despite everything, a part of him still longed for the man who had turned his world upside down. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 6. Bound by Fate. The days following Kale's reluctant surrender to Adrian's influence were a blur. Despite his lingering anger and the confusion swirling in his mind, his body continued to betray him. Every moment in Adrian's presence was a battle between what his heart wanted and what his instincts demanded. Adrian was relentless, but in a way that felt almost nurturing. His patience seemed endless, and every gesture, every word was carefully calculated to draw Kale closer. And each time Kale felt himself giving in, the resentment burned a little brighter, but it wasn't enough to stop the undeniable connection that was growing between them. The once independent alpha was now tangled in Adrian's web, unable to break free. It was late one evening when Kale finally gave voice to the thoughts that had been plaguing him for days. He found Adrian in the study, reviewing some documents. Despite the tension in the air, Adrian's presence was magnetic, and Kale felt his heart racing as he walked toward him. "You're going to get what you want, aren't you?" Kale's voice was raw, laced with frustration. He could feel his pulse quickening as Adrian looked up, his expression unreadable. Adrian set the papers down slowly and turned his full attention to Kale. "What do you mean?" "You've already taken everything from me. You've changed me. You've made me into this." Kale's voice cracked slightly as he fought to maintain control. "And now you want me to fall in love with you. You want to make me dependent on you. To keep me like this." Adrian's gaze softened, and he stood walking over to Kale with a deliberate, steady pace. His voice was low, soothing. "Kale, I never meant to take anything from you. I wanted to help you. I wanted you to see that we're meant to be together. Truly together. Not just for now, but for always." "By making me weaker?" Kale spat, though his words were less forceful than he intended. He could already feel the shift in his body's response to Adrian's nearness, the way his heart fluttered with each word. "By helping you accept who you are now," Adrian replied softly. "You are still powerful, Kale. You're just different. I'm not asking you to lose yourself. I'm asking you to trust me." "I don't know if I can trust you," Kale murmured, his anger faltering. The temptation to just give in was overwhelming. Adrian reached out, his hand brushing against Kale's cheek in an almost tender gesture. The soft touch made Kale's breath catch, a sharp contrast to the storm of emotions churning inside him. "You don't have to trust me all at once," Adrian whispered. "You just need to let me prove that I'm worth trusting." Days turned into weeks, and Kale found himself caught in a spiral of conflicting emotions. His body was changing in ways he couldn't fully understand, but it wasn't just physical. Mentally and emotionally, he was unraveling, becoming more attuned to Adrian's every move, every word, as if he couldn't exist without him. One evening, after another encounter where Adrian's pheromones had clouded his mind, Kale found himself alone in his apartment, his thoughts overwhelming him. The truth began to settle in his chest. He was no longer the man he once was, and even though he fought against it, even though he loathed it, he was starting to need Adrian in a way he couldn't explain. A knock at the door snapped Kale out of his spiraling thoughts. Without thinking, he opened it, and there stood Adrian, as composed as ever, but something in his eyes softened when he saw the confusion on Kale's face. "You're not yourself," Adrian said, his voice gentle, almost concerned. "What's going on?" Kale hesitated, his emotions a tangled mess. "I don't know who I am anymore, Adrian." Adrian stepped forward, his hands reaching for Kale's shoulder, steadying him. "You are Kale Laurent. You're still you, but now you're with me, and together we can figure this out. I don't know if I want this. Want you. Like this, Kale whispered, the admission tasting bitter. He was so used to being strong, but now he felt weak, lost in a storm of feelings that didn't make sense. Adrian's hand slid to the back of Kale's neck, pulling him closer. You've already accepted it, Kale. You've accepted me. Your body, your heart, they're already mine. You just need to realize that. With that, Adrian kissed him, slowly, gently at first, testing. But Kale's body responded immediately. It was a kiss that felt like a promise, like a binding contract that neither of them could back away from. Kale, despite all his resistance, found himself leaning into it, his hands moving to Adrian's chest, his mind blurring with the emotions he didn't want to face. Later that night, as they lay together, Kale's mind was filled with questions, with fear, but also with something deeper, a connection he couldn't sever. Adrian had done it. He had made Kale need him, and now they were bound in a way Kale couldn't even begin to describe. You won't ever leave me, Kale, Adrian murmured, his voice full of certainty. Kale closed his eyes, feeling the weight of Adrian's words settle into his heart. He wanted to deny it, wanted to push him away, but as Adrian's warmth surrounded him, Kale finally admitted to himself that he had already lost the fight. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what Adrian had planned all along. Chapter 7. The Unbreakable Bond. Kale woke the next morning with a lingering sense of disbelief. He had spent the night in Adrian's arms, his once unwavering resistance now a distant memory. Adrian had been patient, understanding in a way that Kale hadn't expected, but he still felt trapped. He couldn't deny the bond between them, a force so strong it felt like it was etched into his very being. His body had succumbed to Adrian's pheromones, but more than that, his heart was slowly shifting. The days that followed were an endless dance between desire and resistance. Kale would try to pull away, to regain some semblance of the autonomy he had lost, but every time Adrian would find a way back into his space. It wasn't through force, but through patience, through a love that seemed boundless. Adrian never pushed, never pressured. But his presence was like a gravity Kale couldn't escape. The more Kale resisted, the more his body craved it, and the more his heart slowly began to unravel. Weeks passed, and Kale's transformation continued, though it wasn't just physical anymore. His emotions were shifting in ways he hadn't expected. The Omega instincts were powerful, overwhelming even, but there was a part of him that still yearned to be the alpha he once was. One evening, as Kale sat at Adrian's desk, sorting through papers, a familiar tightness settled deep in his stomach. The same sensation that had caused his nausea in the past few days returned. He paused, pressing a hand to his stomach. It was too soon to tell, but the feeling was unmistakable. His body, though changing, still held some of the old signs. And now something new was stirring. Kale stared at the pile of documents before him, the reality dawning on him, slowly. Adrian had done this to him. Kale's heartbeat quickened, but this time it wasn't from anger. It was from the strange realization of what had taken root in his body. He was pregnant. After weeks of restlessness, Kale couldn't hold back anymore. He had to face Adrian. He walked into the study, his face flushed with uncertainty. Adrian was seated at the table, looking over some documents. When he looked up at Kale, his expression softened immediately. He could see the change in Kale, the way his steps were heavier, the way his scent was tinged with confusion. Kale, Adrian's voice was gentle, knowing. I'm pregnant, Kale managed, his voice almost a whisper. Adrian rose from his chair in an instant, his face alight with an emotion Kale couldn't quite name. There was joy, there was tenderness, and there was something else. You're sure? Kale nodded, trying to ignore the strange mix of feelings swirling inside him. Yes, I didn't think I could be, but I am. Without another word, Adrian pulled Kale into his arms, holding him with a tenderness that belied the intensity of their journey together. This is everything, Kale, Adrian whispered against his ear. This is the start of our forever. Kale couldn't bring himself to resist the embrace. He had always fought against being controlled, against being vulnerable, but here in Adrian's arms it felt right. He was going to be a father, and somehow it didn't feel like something to fear. Epilogue, forever bound to the alpha. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Kale's pregnancy progressed, and with it his acceptance of his new life and identity. The bond between him and Adrian deepened in ways Kale hadn't anticipated. The once distant memories of his alpha days began to feel less relevant as he leaned into his new role. Not just as an Omega, but as Adrian's partner and the father of their children. The pregnancy itself was challenging. Kale experienced the full force of Omega instincts, cravings, and mood swings. But through it all, Adrian was there, supporting him every step of the way. Their connection, once forged in manipulation, was now based on true love and trust. Kale's body had softened, and while his strength as an alpha had diminished, his ability to nurture, to create life, had blossomed. Adrian never let him forget how powerful he was, how strong Kale had always been, even as he adjusted to his new role. Months later, Kale gave birth to twin girls. They were perfect, their little cries filling the room as Kale held them in his arms for the first time. Adrian stood beside him, his eyes full of pride, and Kale couldn't help but feel a profound sense of fulfillment. Despite the manipulation that had started their journey, this moment, this family, was something he never could have imagined. "Look at them, Kale," Adrian said softly, his voice filled with awe as he looked at their daughters. "They're our future." Kale looked down at the tiny lives in his arms, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the weight of uncertainty. They were his future too. They were bound by love, by fate, and by a choice that had been made long ago. As Adrian gently caressed the back of Kale's hand, he whispered, "I love you, Kale. And now we are truly one." Kale's heart swelled as he leaned into Adrian, their children nestled between them. "I love you too," Kale whispered, and for the first time he was certain that nothing, no force in the world, could ever break the bond they had forged. Together as a family, they faced a future that would always be theirs. The empire they built was not just in business, but in love, in trust, and in the new life they had created together.